Okay, we're back again here, and we're here at allpointstv.com, and I'm on studio here in Genesee County. Don't forget that. And we are here to spend the next hour with you. Don't you dare leave your. Where are you watching this from? The computer? Are you watching us on? We're on so many different networks right now. We have to ask where are the viewers watching the program because at one time we knew where you watching the program. We were at the primitive level. We had just begun the feeds that we're putting in, and now they're picking us up, and we're getting a lot of broadcasts from different networks, and we're very proud of that, and we want to make sure we earn our keep. This is not charity. You got to have some viewers to maintain that place with the major players. I want to thank them too. Rumble, I want to thank you for sticking with us because when nobody else was with us, you were right there, and we were just trying to get our feet in the door, and you were right there along with what we were trying to do and giving us some encouragement. We definitely appreciate it. Now I'm not so sure that the other networks that picked us up later all that happy about some of the things we're doing, but we're here, and we're very glad to be a part of a much larger network. The team is they're doing what they're doing. Uh, Our goal is to stay up and afloat and give some different information out there that's not being given by any other network. And we're doing some things here. I think that constitutionally we're grounded more so here than they are in some of the networks. So you'll see that hopefully in our discussion today as we continue what we were doing last week when we were talking about, we were trying to get to our second topic, which was the 1803 very famous, should I say famous, a very infamous court case called Marbury versus Madison. And you could take it as a famous case or an infamous case, depending on how you see the ruling and the fallout that came therein as a result of that ruling, because that ruling set a lot of things in motion and a lot of things that we're now experiencing in 2025 has to do with Marbury versus Madison. Anyway, we're going to talk about that today is our main topic, and I want to say a few things about it. I don't think the other persons will be making the points we're making here. I certainly don't think we should go to extremes of some of the things I'm hearing on television about how to handle these, how to control judges. Some people are saying, I think Mark Levine's point his for the last couple of weeks has been to stop these renegade judges. His solution to it would be to simply abolish the office that were created by the Congress. Since they were created by the Congress can in fact nullify the existence of those courts, because as you know, the Constitution sets up three branches of government, and in the judiciary branch, the third of the three articles that set up the separation of powers in the three branches of government, and the third article sets up the judicial branch, and in section 1 of that, it talks about um, one Supreme Court, and of course that is set up by the Constitution. And then it says the legislative branch will set up the inferior courts, and those inferior courts now acting like they act like they're the court that's set up by the Constitution, and by way of implying that they're not going to come out and say that, because you cannot say that based upon the fact that the document is very clear. It sets up one Supreme Court, but it understands that it may be a need for additional courts to handle some of the issues that come up from time to time in the future. And they said that therefore, not knowing what they would pretend in the future, they said that Congress was set up, and listen to what they said in the language in the Constitution. It says legislative branch will set up the inferior courts. So one Supreme Court, which is part of the separation of powers, and then for other business come before the federal government, it says that the Congress, then the legislative branch, can set up inferior courts, and that's where the problem will come in, and that's what the problems are right now. These inferior courts set up by the Congress, they think they're part of the separation of powers. And they're now, it's amazing what they're doing, quite frankly. They're now trying to order the president around as if they're part of those three branches. They are a percentage of the judicial branch of government, a small percentage of the judicial branch of government, and a lesser part of the judicial branch of government, as stated in the Constitution, Section 1 of Article 3. I'm going to be doing a little correcting of some of the things that are being said here um, regarding that as well, because we have got to get back. We really don't have any choice in the matter right now. We're so far off base in the country, and we're so far removed from what the Constitution requires of our leaders, and our political institutions are out of control. Our politicians are out of control almost completely. And if we don't get back on track, and I've been saying this for a couple of months, if we don't get back on track pretty soon, I'm not so sure that those persons that are sending out these warnings that there is a point of no return. And if we don't rein this power back in, I'm not all that hopeful that we'll get to a point where we will have control before we lose it all. We'll have control and rein it back to underneath the document where it's intended to be. If we're going to be a nation of laws, we keep saying we're a nation of laws. If we're going to be a nation of laws, we're going to have to follow the Constitution of the United States and use that as the document that lays out the parameters of the legalities in the country. The Constitution should define the boundary lines. And if you don't have that, for example, you have these lesser courts, and there are, how many of them are there? 600 and some odd, 700 some odd lesser courts being created on the federal level. If you have those lesser courts that are going to make the decisions about how let's say the president of the United States should uh, uh, carry out his responsibilities, what if each of those 600 and some odd to 700 and some odd lesser courts decide they're going to order the president around, and they have the election held, and the people voted for the president because he had a campaign based upon what he was arguing he would in fact bring about once he was elected, and then it can be canceled by the judges, and he's not in these judges in the lesser courts are canceling out the promises made during an election to an official elected by the total body politic. Nobody's elected them; they are appointed. They're not even created by the Constitution. They are created by the legislative branch of government. So one of the three branches of government sets up the lesser courts, but it's one of the three branches of government, and then it sets up lesser courts that have the authority over the president. They don't have the authority in the legislative branch of government. It's a separation of powers. And I was contending a couple of weeks ago that if you want to say that the country is grounded upon the freedom of, it is what they say, freedom of press, freedom of religion, right to assemble, and this is the basis of the freedoms in this country. Then my question to those that actually say that, and they all say it, is then if that is the case, why is it an afterthought in the Constitution of the United States? It's an afterthought because there's an addendum to it, and the amendments are added as an addendum to the Constitution. Not the Constitution; it's the amendments to the Constitution. The Constitution is the 7 articles that were in fact drafted in Philadelphia in 1787, and the ratification of the Constitution did not have any amendments in it. It had those 7 articles, and the amendments of the Constitution would come later, 3 years later, after the ratification of the document had occurred. And so now we talk about these inferior courts, but these inferior courts are not acting like the inferior courts. They act like they're part of the separation of powers. The separation of powers is the 3 branches of government that are ordinated by the Constitution of the United States. The articles 1, 2, and 3 set up the three branches of government, and it does not set up the inferior courts. Congress does that. One of the three branches of government set up in Articles 1, 2, and 3 sets up the lesser courts, and then the lesser courts have more authority than it would have more authority really than the legislative branch, to which it owes to which they owe their creation. And that doesn't make any sense, because if they can be set up by one of the three branches of government and then order one of the three branches to do X, Y, and Z, then the powers are not separated. That's the argument that I don't hear anybody making. That if you're going to have separation of powers, then there must be clearly defined lines of demarcation between the three branches of government, to each one, therefore, in order to make the separation real and make it work, they must all stay in their lane. And I do not agree with these scholars that are saying that the way you reign these lesser courts that are making all these rulings, that the way these suggestions they're making, Mark Levine made this suggestion just the other day, I think last weekend, is making the suggestion that what ought to happen, what hasn't happened to rein these judges in, you have to, the Congress must exercise authority, since they created the lesser courts, they exercise authority, and because they created it, therefore they can extinguish the lower courts. They created it, therefore they can put it into exile. They can extinguish it and simply declare it is non-existence, and they declare it not to exist, and then extinguish those courts. You don't have to go to that level. You can they claim. See, there's another claim they made. They make the claim that and saying that they ought to, in fact, keep the not keep the courts operating, to banish those courts. The reason they do that is they say that the impeachment process is too cumbersome, and they're not going to get enough votes to, in fact, turn these judges out of office. And the error that they make is that they think that the impeachment process is only for removal from the office. The impeachment process is a two-tiered process. It's a process in which you will make the accusation in one of the two branches of the bicameral Congress, and then you will, in fact, after having made the accusation, then you can or cannot, you will or you won't. It's not guaranteed you will or you won't. Once you've done the impeachment, it's up to the impeachment body to decide what they're going to do with it. And they don't have to carry it to the Senate. They've always done it that way. But that's a way. It depends on it. But what they're not getting is that it depends upon what the intention is. Sometimes the intention of impeachment should be below the removal ceiling, the level of removal. It should be to put the what do I want to say here? The office holder that is out of control or needs to be reined back in. It could be like a warning to cease and desist from the course that you're following, and to get back within the guidelines that you are supposed to be following as a part of the as a part of a part, in this case here, a part of a branch of a government. I saw what one writer says, like 0.05%. These judges, all these lower judges, about 0.05% of the judiciary, because there's so many of them. If they all decide to make a decision, and this one making a decision, the other one making a decision, you have your head on a swivel, because so many judgments are being made in so many different arenas. Whose voice is to be listened to? And these radical judges actually believe, and they sold us to the country, that the president of the United States can be ordered around by these lower courts. The president cannot be ordered around by the Supreme Court. That's known courts that have been created by one of the three branches of government, and then they are co-equal and co-sovereign, and then the legislative branch of government is co-sovereign and co-equal to the I'm talking about the courts now, co-equal to the legislative branch, co-equal to the executive branch, co-equal now, not above, not more equal, but equal to the other two branches, all three equal to each one equal to the other two, and not above them and not below them, but co-equal and co-sovereign. And they're going to make it as if the body that can create by the Constitution the judicial lower courts, they can then come in order within the separation of powers how one of those powers should in fact operate. Got the courts, the lower courts doing that. That is so profane. And if the framers came back here and saw that they had done that, taking liberty like that with Section 1 of Article 3, if they came back and saw that's how they turned that language into the domination of the judicial branch of government was not intended. I don't think it was. If I recall correctly, I'm gonna go back and check this. I think that it's not until Federalist Paper 84. I'm pretty sure it's in 80. I think it's 84. They were winding down at the writing of the. They thought they had done a good job of covering all the bases of what they had done in Philadelphia. They're trying to explain this to the nation, what they had come up with, trying to explain how the Constitution worked, how it was derived at, and some of the logic behind it. I think they didn't get around to the court until Federalist Paper, I think 84. And it's only 85 Federalist Papers, but 84, I think it was. In fact, I got to go and check this, but so there's so many years between grad school and now. But I think that 84 was the first one that they took on this whole thing of the judicial branch of government. But it was intended to be the weakest of the three branches. The weak, and they actually saw it that way. The three branches of government, and then the third branch, which the order of it shows you the primacy of the branch by the fact that the lawmaking is first, and then you have to have the law enforcement. That's number two, and you have to have somebody that will you say interpret the law. That's not really what it was. It is to in fact handle disputes that come up, and somebody have the last word in the disputes. That's the court, but the court doesn't always have the last. Does not have the last voice in all disputes. There's another problem we have. The court doesn't have the last voice in all disputes. And the fact of the matter is, if you have a separation of powers, and you certainly have that, then every branch of the government whose powers are separate must be therefore the custodian of the domain to which they're delegated the power within that domain by the Constitution of the United States. That's why some of the persons are coming around to this view that if they are making certain mandates that go outside of the orbit of where they are supposed to be in their lane, I know this sounds radical, but people say I'm calling for chaos. I'm calling for them to follow the Constitution. Any judge that goes outside of the parameters of what is in their domain as that branch of government, that needs to be swatted away. The president should, in fact, simply ignore these verdicts, and then let the chips fall where they may. Everybody's so scared of impeachment. Let them. George Washington wasn't afraid of impeachment. George Washington invited impeachment. When they came into his domain and asked him to produce those records in the executive branch of government, George Washington told them no. But then he told them also that the Constitution doesn't allow for you to have an avenue through which you can come into this area and secure those records you're looking for, but you cannot do it by you making demand of it. He was telling them you must use the Constitution to bring that about, and told them that they could, in fact, secure those documents through the impeachment if they bring that about, as if they're going to impeach the first president of the United States and the founder of the country, and you're going to get yourself into that quagmire. The most popular man in the country, you're going to take that on. And they backed down from making that demand. They were demanding that this man in the executive branch of government turn over the records, the backdrop. You know, when a president is negotiating with different countries, and people on the outside think they have as much information as the president has, there are a lot of things happening in the background that you don't have access to. Sometimes it's the conversation between this leader and another leader and some others involved in the conversation, and you have all of that, and you have documents that show what was said, what was intended, all the nuances of the discussion, and so on and so forth. You don't have it on the outside, and therefore you cannot always assume that you know all the things that went into making a decision that's made by the executive branch of government. But if you want to find those documents out, you got to go through the procedures that's available to get those documents. Otherwise, you cannot come into the executive branch of government and then tell the president what he ought to do. As a co-equal member of the government, he should not allow that. You don't have to abolish. You don't have to abolish any courts. It would not be a bad idea, but it's not necessary to do that to maintain what you have. What you have here is separation of powers. You must that needs to be respected. And we got off, and we're off now. We were very off of what was intended, but we got off in 1803 with Marbury versus Madison. I think, quite frankly, John Marshall John Marshall was very crafty, but I think that looking back at that case, I said this in one of the class, didn't go over well. I think that John Marshall should have been impeached at that point. Now, we've impeached 15 federal judges. 15 of them have been impeached. Nobody wants to talk about how we began to fall away from what was intended, but it really starts with John Marshall. I think John Marshall, just by the longevity of it, and the person that came after him, Roger B. Taney, Marshall was in there for 34 years. I think Taney was in there for like 28 years. Roger B. Taney came in after Marshall. Marshall was there from 1801 to 1835, and then Roger B. Taney, he was no hot shot either, and he came. I think he was in there like 28 years. But I think Marshall. I said this. I said this. It didn't go over well because people think that because he was such a strong judicial figure, they're not willing to look at some of the things that happened to his administration. I think that that on his resume, having the Marbury Madison case on his resume is a black mark on his record. Because if you understand the things that happened in the background to bring that to how they got to the Supreme Court, you have to understand that case had no business being there at that level when it was not in the language talks about the specific cases that can go to the Supreme Court directly. And Marbury's case does not fit into that, which is described as court cases that go directly to the Supreme Court, where the court has original jurisdiction. Now, here's what's happening, and here's what I think that the argument to be made about Marbury is that, given the background of it, first of all, John Marshall was the Secretary of State at that time under John Adams. He was the one, by the way, that was supposed to issue, because let me back up a little bit. I'm getting a little too excited here. John Adams did not think he was going to lose that election. and it went around and around and around 35 different. I mean, it was not just simply cut and dried that election would play out the way it played out in 1800. That's why John Furling. That's a very good book to read by John Furling. It's called uh, Adams versus Jefferson: The Tumultuous Election of 1800. That's a very good book. John Furling is one of the major writers of this time period. That's a major book. That book needs to be read. If those who read the book, well, I think will agree with me on the fact that that election was a lot similar to the election that we had. I'm talking about in terms of the idea of the outcome of the election. It was very similar to the election we had here in this country in 2016. It took the country by it took the Adams administration by storm. It had not prepared for the outcome. I mean, because look how the passage of power had come into Adams's hands by George Washington. The great George Washington stepped away from power and went back to Mount Vernon. So we didn't have any reason to believe that the power would be contested as it would be, certainly by the ones that contested it, because there's a lot of problems that Madison has with John Adams, and Thomas Jefferson had problems with John Adams. In fact, these men did not speak to each other for multiple numbers of decades after this event was over. When Jefferson and Adams fell out because they had been in such a strong part of the same team. When they fell out, this is a major fallout that occurred. And I think in fact, they died the same when when Adams and Jefferson died the same day, July the 4th, 1826. They died on the fifth. They died on the 5th anniversary of the Declaration of Independence. And when Adams died, his words were, "Jefferson survives me," which he did for a few more hours. Abigail, Adams' wife, and I think she tried to bring about reconciliation between them, but that was a very hard thing for formerly close friends and allies to take, because what Adams was doing was running for re-election, and those that were in those that were in his cabinet came up against him. What they came up against him with was him signing into law the Alien Sedition Act. 4 of them. There were 4 acts in that proposition. The one that survived at that time and still in the books right now, the one that Trump is using, is the Alien Sedition Act. The enemies, the Alien and Enemies Act, that still is on the books. That's the one that Trump is using. And that's why you should not listen to these judges telling him that he has no authority to deport anyone he feels a danger in this country. His job is to secure the country. He's the commander in chief. They're not the commander in chief. We need to have any courts being abolished in order to bring this about. Just simply swat that away and refuse. I don't know why people are so afraid of the impeachment process. It's there. It's to be respected. Let's use the process that we have that should be used. The premise gave us a process. Let's not be afraid to use it. Let them bring the charges if they don't like what the president is in fact doing. But they made it very difficult for this to be a fly-by-night type of operation where you're simply going to object because you don't like some things that are going on. This is not a very easy process to affect the outcome that you want. To remove someone from office, the framers knew this could not be about majority rule. Oh, it's about our democracy. They were not into that frame of thought. They were talking about how you set up a government that runs without so many bumps in it, iron these things out so that these things cannot be taken by on whim, and have people going by I feel, I believe, I want, and things like that. You have to have the rule of law. There's a rule of law here. There's a way you can get things done, even though you got a separation of powers, but you have to make sure you go through the rudiments in order to bring that about. And what the separation of powers does, it sets up a hedge around each of the branches of government, and to penetrate that hedge is what is required. And you can only do it through the impeachment process. That's why you can. I think Biden was a terrible president. He was a lawless president. But there's nothing you can do about it now. The tools you had in your hands that you didn't use, you cannot use it once the president stepped down from office, because you can only impeach the president while he's in office. You cannot impeach him once he leaves office. And they've lost an opportunity. I think Biden should have been held accountable. It's too late for it now. Ain't nothing they can do. Not constitutionally. They cannot do anything to bring Biden to before the Congress and say, we don't like this, that, and the other, and we're going to bring you before the body and question you about what you did. It's too late. Because the Constitution does not allow that. And you can read that in Article 1, Section 3, Clause 7, and you'll see that it cannot be allowed. It's not allowed, not by the Constitution. But here's what's going on in Marbury versus Madison, 1803. Adams didn't intend to lose the election. And I would equate that with 2016 and 2020. They had no intention in 2016 of Donald Trump. This guy was a laughing stock. They had no intention of this guy becoming president. This is a ha-ha moment. We never had anything like this. And here's a guy coming with no resume, no political resume. He had a business resume. He didn't have anything in the political arena he could point to. Never happened before. No military service. That's another thing. Either one or the other. Either military service or political service in quotation marks in a lot of cases. But political experience. Didn't have any political experience. Didn't have any military background. And here's a guy coming out of the business world trying to become president of the United States. Now everybody's trying to be president. They got the old AOC up there right now. But it took them by surprise. In 2016, he had no contingency plans in place. Adams didn't have any contingency plans in place. He'd been passed down through a smooth transition from George Washington to John Adams as vice president, and Washington left. And then the power at that, what do? Washington leaves. Well, the vice president. It didn't have to happen that way, but it did. Passed down to the vice president runs, he wins. But when it came down to re-election of the vice president, now the president of the United States, and now he's being re-elected, that's being contested because of what this former revolutionary did in 1798. He took over the presidency in 1797. In 1798, he signed that Alien Sedition Act, through which there were a lot of those revolutionaries, Jefferson being one of them, that took some umbrage that this guy was out there when we were out there fighting the British over this liberty issue. And now look what Adams is doing. This signing that bill into law, they were horrified. What is this, a dictator? This is King George III in the personage that you couldn't criticize the government in certain parts of those 4 acts. And they took him on because they objected to it. This was very a painful moment for these revolutionaries. Don't forget, they're the ones who were fighting for liberty. And there's Adams standing up with them and then signing that into law. They couldn't stomach that. And so when the election came up, this is re-election of Adams at this point in 1800, they stood up against him. Madison stood up against him. The father of the Constitution stood up against him, and so did the major writer of the Declaration of Independence stood up against Adams. Adams, they'll go through 35 ballots, because they had a very, they had to affect how you deal with. You see problems come up and you have to work it out. Some things come up you had not foreseen, and this idea that you vote for the president and the one that comes in second will be vice president. That does not work as well, because in 1800, what happened is that you had people that had ties. I think it was 73 for Adams, 73 for Jefferson. I think they had the same number of electoral votes, and that was a flaw in the way it works. It works right now with them amending the Constitution, is that you have the president and vice president running together as a team. But at one time, the vice president could be from a different party. You could have the president, and then the one get the second number of votes and become vice president. Now, not even the same party. They're not even the same ideological school of their thinking about how the government should be operated. That was handled by the amendment 1804. But they did not foresee that, and that's why this problem comes up. He went to 35 ballots. Adams did not expect to lose that election. But when the 35, on the 35th ballot or 36th ballot, somewhere around there, they now have a decision, and that decision was by whatever the balloting was. Jefferson would be the next president of the United States. The third president of the United States would be Thomas Jefferson. Adams would be turned away from running for re-election. This is the first time this happened. And it was a very important election, because even in the angry setting that played down in, Adams reluctantly relinquished power, but he relinquished power. So that election. As I think about that election is probably the most important election this country had in terms of getting the country on the ground and having the peaceful transition of power. It doesn't mean they weren't pouting over it, but the transition of power starts at that point there. It was contested. Adams didn't like it. In fact, Adams would leave, I think, 4 o'clock that morning on Inauguration Day. He was so mad at Jefferson, didn't wait around for the inauguration, left Washington, and went back to Quincy, Massachusetts, went back to either Quincy or Braintree, Massachusetts, and chomping at the bits, angry, and they did not reconcile for decades and decades and decades. That's kind of angry that set in. Now, I'm not a fan. I don't know of a Chief Justice of the Supreme Court, quite frankly, that I'm a fan of. I think they've all been bad. But I fought John Marshall more than the others, because you have to set the mold. And he had an opportunity to do some great things with it in his wheelhouse. But don't forget now that John Jay was the first Chief Justice of the Supreme Court, and look at what happened in terms of how they viewed John Jay as the Chief Justice. They were hanging him in effigy. That was a little joke they had about that John Jay could find his way home by the fires that were lit and setting his image on fire in those yards as he was going back home after he had stepped down. He could see his way through the fires that were lit. He was so unpopular at that point. And then you three other you had two other members of the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court. The fourth Chief Justice was John Marshall, and John Marshall got in there and thought he was the forerunner to Franklin Delano Roosevelt. Would not step down. In a way, these guys. In a way, that's another form of tyranny when you do what Marshall did, what Taney did, and what Roosevelt did. It's another form of tyranny where you don't step down. You won't quit the power voluntarily after a reasonable amount of time, and you made the contribution. You don't step away from power. That's a dictatorship, but it's not a dictatorship by fiat. It's still a dictatorship on the sly because Roosevelt was a dictator by election, 32, 36, 40, and 44, and died in office in 45. Roosevelt was a dictator, the second presidential dictator this country's had. The second dictator this country's had in the presidency. The first was Abraham Lincoln. What do you scholars think about that? No, what Marshall should have done. I'm still on this point of what should have happened in that court case. This is a very important court case. There were three issues involved in that case. First of all, you probably read in the book where you talk about these were midnight judges. These were midnight appointees. At the last minute, Adams, now knowing he's going to be thrown out of office, the election did not go his way. He did not get the number of electoral votes he needed in order to become president, because the electoral vote elects the president of the United States, not the popular vote. He now realized he's out the door and now scurrying around trying to do what the election did not do. Listen very carefully to this part here. See, it's one thing to lose the election and then to walk away from it. It's another thing to try to suborn the election outcome by doing in the rinse, which you could not do in the wash. Let's say the voters came to the poll and voted for the candidacy of the person that ran on this campaign. The other person that lost it ran on his campaign and he lost. Therefore, this is the primacy of what ought to occur. And Adams was not willing to walk away and allow that power to fall into the hands of his political enemies. And Jefferson had become his political enemy at this point. So they decide that before stepping down, they're hurrying now to get the people in place that could, in fact, carry forth the agenda. As if they had won the election, they don't want to give up what they were trying to do when they were in power. They want to do that even though they're not in power anymore. And people have voted a different outcome, a different way to handle the government. They want to, in fact, maintain it as if they had won the election and do what they would have done if that had, in fact, had been the outcome. Well, they got all these commissions got to be delivered before March the 4th, because that's the inauguration date of the president back in this time period. And they ran out of time. Now, don't forget, as I said earlier, the Secretary of State at this point under Adams was John Marshall. Marshall had not been appointed to the court at this point, but he has a vested interest in the case because he's Secretary of State, and it was his job to make sure that those commissions that had been signed by Adams had been delivered to the recipients, so that Adams had his idea was to stack the court, these courts, these lesser courts created by the Congress, to stack them with people who were Federalists, like Adams was. And John Marshall ran out of time. And some of those commissions were not delivered before Jefferson was sworn in and inaugurated as the third president of the United States. The question now becomes, what do you do with those undelivered commissions that have been signed by Adams when he was president of the United States? They were not delivered when Adams was president, but if the president coming in says no to those undelivered commissions, what do you do? Well, there are three questions to be answered here. And this is what is what one of the persons that did not get the commission was Marbury. Marbury did not get the commission as his commission would have been that of the Chief Justice, and he is now deprived of what he considers to be, and it was really a deprivation in that sense, of a property right. The Federalist Court, the Federalist Congress had okayed all those commissions that Adams had in fact requested of them, and it had been okayed by the Congress of the United States, run by the Federalists. But here's this antagonistic president coming in, and he has Madison. Now, don't forget, Madison is the father of the Constitution. Madison is his Secretary of State. And Madison is told by Jefferson not to deliver those undelivered commissions. That's where the problem comes in. What do you do in that case there? The outgoing president and the outgoing also, don't forget the upheaval of the Congress at that time, because they were turned out of power also. There's a new sheriff in town. What do you do? There are three issues here, three questions. And the crafty John Marshall, this is my view, but I don't think anybody will come up against it. First of all, did Marbury have a legitimate case? The answer is yes. Number two, is there a remedy, a legal remedy to rectify the case? Yes. But number three, and look at John Marshall, how crafty John Marshall is. Because number three should have been number one. Does the court have the constitutional authority to render a verdict in that case, under the circumstance? And you can see the wheels churning in John Marshall, and the wheel is churning is that question, number three, should have been first. Because if the legal remedy cannot be given by the court because it's in the wrong venue, because the court, for those cases, is not spelled out in the Constitution of the Supreme Court have original jurisdiction, it does not belong in the Supreme Court. But here's what Marshall is doing. Marshall understands, this is a very smart man, very crafty man. This is a politician. That's who the judges are today. These are politicians on the court. That's one thing that Trump will have done for the country, even if he does not get anything else done. He's done that for the country. He's exposed those judges. These are politicians wearing robes. Mark Levine has a very good book out called Men in Black. That's a very, very good book. It's certainly better than the book called where he has one of his latest books, where he's talking about he's talking about the press, the unfreedom of the press. The press has never been free in this country. And Mark Levine's idea is that the press has the freedom, the free press has been backed up because the freedom has been taken from him. That's a false view of the press. The press has not been free because the press has always been partisan. It wasn't that they were passing anything to restrict it so much as it was the fact that the press was in fact taking one side against the other, as they're doing right now. You don't have a free press even now. They're voluntarily engaged in censorship. 90 some odd percent of the press coverage against Trump in the news right now, they calculated about 4%. The man has almost fight his way to get his message. He set up his own network to get his information out there because they won't cover it. If it wasn't for Fox and for Newsmax, you would not even know you have a president up there in Washington D.C. But they've been involved in partisanship and self censorship, and so in that regard, they're not a free press. Not that the government has been passing anything necessarily to suppress it, but they've been involved in censoring themselves. When they role they played, the reason why they wanted to give them a certain amount of liberty is because that would in fact ensure that they're the watchdogs they're intended to be, to give the people the information they have where they can hold the government accountable, because you can't do that in the dark. You have to know what your government is in fact doing. And they're not playing that role. They certainly didn't play that role when the press has been used to, as I would say, topple governments in this country, because we've had media d'etats, coup d'etats run by the media. The media ran a coup d'etat against Nixon in 1974. That was a media. That was Nixon was. I listened to him. He's on. You see some tapes of Nixon today. Nixon is aware that some of the comments made in the aftermath of his presidency. He made a lot of media comments about how that unraveled and played out. Nixon was toppled by the toppled by the media. He was overthrown by the media. They knew they had a problem with the impeachment process playing out, because you got to have 2/3 of members of the Senate to vote for the impeachment. You got members of one party in the Senate, and you got to get 2/3 vote of the senators to bring about the removal. That's very difficult to do. What they did is they ran impeachment on the front page of the Washington Post and New York Times for 2 years and kept it in front of the public and dirtied up the name of Nixon so badly that no senator, or whichever party the senator was affiliated with, will come on Nixon's side to come out there in public and side with him against this removal from office. And they told Nixon they could not do it. It's too hot. They made it too hot. So they sabotaged the impeachment process by simply putting it in the paper where they could not, in fact, allow themselves to be identified on that side. They become too hot. They went and told Nixon that they didn't agree with what they were doing, but they could not come out and support him because every politician, no matter what else he says, is that he's for number one. All this about the public, making the world safe for democracy, want to protect our democracy, all that's air. That's wind pudding. Number one is getting elected. Number two, getting reelected. And number three is so far down the road, don't even talk about number three. It doesn't play in the political arena. The idea is power, staying in power. Otherwise, they have to go out there and get a legitimate job. And what kind of job you think these persons gonna get? Who's gonna hire any of these persons up there like AOC? She's not talking about running for president. What kind of job is she gonna get? Who's gonna hire her? Or Nancy Pelosi? What employer can work with Nancy Pelosi? Or this Pocahontas over in Massachusetts? Who could they work under? That probably is for all of them that's in Congress. Who can you see them working under? Let's say that they would be hired by some They hire him as a lobbyist, go up there and talk to their cut buddies who they serve with in the Congress, and they can use them as an intro into that. But no, you can't. They're not employable in the private sector. And then unleashing of this machinery we have right now, that goes back to the 19th century, the first decade of the 19th century, because that was a very dangerous decision was in fact made. Marshall was very crafty in terms of how he handled it. If he had answered the question number 3 and put that where it belongs, number 1, because the first question is whether or not that court case is in the right venue. The Supreme Court, except for the cases that are spelled out in the Constitution, the Supreme Court is an appellate court. The Marbury case, based on the fact that it's not one of the cases that's drawn up in the Constitution to be a original jurisdiction, that was in the wrong venue, and he should have said that. But he used that for number 3. What he did was to create the idea of judicial review, but avoiding the other thing that was a danger for Marshall, and that was the order, which was an order to order Jefferson to do something. Number 1, he wants to expand the power of the court and also get the court respected, because it was the weakest of the 3 branches of government, to get the court respected. So the idea was to create more power for the judiciary, but not risk it by making a ruling that would not be followed, because Jefferson's not going. If they told Jefferson they must issue those commissions, Jefferson would defy the court, and Marshall knows that. You're doing these midnight judges, and you trying to put these persons in the court to frustrate the policy that I will set in motion when I take over office, and you can put these barriers up there and so on and so forth. And I'm going to agree to it. I don't think so. And that's the burden. So what Marshall did, being very crafty as he was, he establishes the fact that they have the right to overlook the issues before the court, but not the right to make a decision about it in that particular case. You can see him cutting it both ways. Judicial review is born out of that without acting on it. And he did it by, in fact, creating the idea the court can review it, but in this case right here, cannot act upon it because it's in the wrong venue. But if he had said that at the very beginning, he could have spared everybody some of the headaches that occurred, because the third question, which was should have been the first question, is it in the right place? If it's in the right place, all the rest of it never been argued. You don't have to argue whether or not the court can, in fact, engage in judicial review. But judicial review is the intention of John Marshall. And that's why the third question, if you go take anything to the court, the first thing the court has to decide, is it in the right place? If you take it before the court and it does not belong there, the court cannot make any restitution under that one claim. Marshall knows that. But he puts that question third, but he establishes judicial review in the first 2. Does Marbury have a case? Yes. A property right, and so on and so forth. Is there a legal remedy? Yes, there is a legal remedy. Number 3, can the court issue that remedy in this case? And the court said no, but no should have been the very beginning of it. The other 2 questions I even asked at that point. It's that backdoor approach that we have now, Marbury versus Madison, that backdoor approach in that case, that we have these courts right now out of control. Judicial review is nowhere found in the Constitution of the United States, nor would it be acceptable to the framers of this country. You'd be horrified to find out that these lower courts today are doing what they're doing, ordering a president of the United States around, when this man is the embodiment of the whole nation, the only officer of his kind in the electoral process. No other officers like the president of the United States. The subtotal of all the people in the country are embodied in the president of the United States. They can all have something to say about who's the leader of the country going to be. They don't have that with any other office holder. And they are doing that to order a president to do certain things. And I fault Trump for this. They want to do to Trump what they tried to do to John Adams. In fact, what they did to John Adams. Did they do it to John Adams? What they tried to do to Thomas Jefferson? Not the, Adams was the culprit here. What they tried to do to Jefferson. You're going to stack the deck against Jefferson because you, as a former player, want to impact as if the election did not occur, and as if a new player was not chosen to occupy the Oval Office, and they're going to act like that didn't happen by these judges and these other influencers in the government. They're going to determine how the government is going to operate in the absence of Adams being president of the United States. And that was where the Shan hit the fan for the first time, and we're now living with the consequences of that today. That's what we're dealing with, and we're going and we need to encourage. This is the midnight hour. We need to encourage Donald Trump to stand up upon the Constitution. You don't need any other tools. You were given the tools by the framers, the separation of powers, and you have the right to say to the courts, nada, not going to do it, not going to be ordered to do it, and I'm not going to accept it. And to stay in your lane, and so on and so forth, and swat these lesser judges out of the way and refuse to follow their mandates, because you cannot dictate to the President of the United States. That's a fact of the Constitution of the United States. Okay, you got to get out of here. That's the going rate. Until next week, I want you to follow your dream. If you don't follow your dream, you'll never know what's on the other side of the rainbow.